driving in your unmarked step van. I'm glad that you're not here. I'm circling around the Beltway, and it's taking me some time to start this war. Controller, I shaved my head again last night, and I can't see nothing but sky. Don't think you'd like my new controller, but you ought to give it a try. We drove all night quoting Gilgamesh, dreaming of David Koresh. We spent the days in the DC sun. The AC was broke, not fun. Driving old W step van. Well, how did you survive driving old W step van? Well, how did you survive? Controller, we found the Tavistock T-base, just like you said we would. But someone stole our atlas, sir, and the medication's no good. The pontiff said it was Sasquatch, and I laughed at him and said, the man wouldn't let that happen, pontiff, so I punched him in the head. Then we went up to Iron Mountain, went way down underground. We hopped up in the roped off area and had a quick look around. We stepped into the elevator, pressed the red button that was there. The door closed tight, I heard a rumbling sound. The elevator began to haul ass. I don't remember passing out, but when I came to, the pontiff was dead. My hands were numb, my jaw was sore, and I heard a loud voice in my head. The voice told me to get some sarin gas. The ATF needed my help. The voice began to laugh, controller. My implant started to beat. I got back in the step van. I began to drive my route. There were unmarked jets flying overhead, leaving contrails full of experimental viruses. Driving old W step van. Well, how did you survive driving old W step van? Well, how did you survive? Controller, I'm driving in your unmarked step van. I'm glad that you're not here. I've been circling around the Beltway, and it's taking me some time to start this war. Driving old W step van. Well, how did you survive driving old W step van? Well, how did you survive driving old W step van? Driving old W step van.
This is the Grassy Knoll. You're listening to AM 1610 WDCX. This is also streaming on Remnant Radio and PascalRadio.org. And this is segment 5 of the series we're doing with Andrew Colvin. His website is andycolvin.com. And he is the producer of the film, The Mothman's Photographer. And he's got a whole lot more information that goes into it, much more, I'm sure, than the documentary could have ever encompassed this time around, and he'll tell me if I'm wrong. But in the meantime, Andrew, you've got a couple little news bites to discuss before we get into the meat of the matter.
Yeah, I've got several things from last time, just little bits, and then some little fragments of things that happened this week. So I'm going to try to blow through them. First of all, we talked about the anthrax coming out of Columbus, and it was misleading at the time because the news was saying it was the Ames, Iowa strain, making people think it was from Iowa.
That's
now,
right.
I think that was almost purposefully misleading. It was actually from Ohio. The book on the CIA and art connection was by Francis Saunders. It's called The Cultural Cold War. And it's basically the idea there was that the CIA infiltrated the art movement to take political messages out of art, because in the kind of the middle part of the century there, you had a lot of the Jack Kerouac kind of mentality going, which was seen as threatening. So they came in with all these, they promoted these guys who were doing abstract art, which had no political content. A note about the sniper, DC sniper.
Okay.
It's an interesting detail. The Bushmaster rifle, I don't know if a lot of people know this. We know about it here in Seattle because the rifle was from here. They bought it, they supposedly stole it here, but there's no way you could steal a 50 caliber Bushmaster from a gun store in Seattle. It's impossible. And I can tell you that from being in there and seeing them. But the provenance of the gun is very suspicious. They could never pin down how they got the gun. But it's interesting because the Bushmaster rifle is made in, I believe it's Massachusetts, and the owner of the company is a big Bush supporter, similar to the Diebold executive in Ohio, the voting machine guy who's a big supporter and campaign manager for Bush. I don't think I brought this at all up anywhere, but before I forget, we had a lot of missing fetuses in my hometown when we were growing up. I've got lots of stories from women in the area who told me that they got pregnant and then the fetus disappeared. And the doctors just called it a miscarriage.
Oh, all right, hold on. Okay, I got to stop you there. Did these women have aborted pregnancies or something like that, or are you saying that perhaps that the fetus was extracted from them?
Who knows? We don't know what happened. We just know that they were sometimes 3 months pregnant. The fetus disappears, or they're in their mid second trimester. Even I think there was one.
Holy mackerel!
And this is very common in the UFO abduction world. We even had a woman who claims that she had a virgin birth. Okay. Now, and again, I don't want to get anybody riled up here, but that's what I heard. And
that's fine.
It's a credible person. It's a very credible person. And it's not, I personally don't think it's that out of the ordinary for this phenomenon because it's very closely linked to the religious phenomena that has spawned, so many of our major religions. That they all sort of spring from this same unexplainable
immaculate conception type thing.
I even had a girlfriend who lost a fetus, and I wanted to bring this up because of the strange tie-in to the Exorcist movie, which there's all these weird things that have happened with people that had some connection to it. And at the time I was dating her, I had bought a car from Linda Blair's boyfriend. So this, Linda Blair had been in this car a lot, and the car blew up after the day I sold it. I had it for like a year or two, and the day I sold it, it caught on fire. The engine just suddenly caught on the dashboard. Everything just caught on fire while the guy was. He was really upset. He thought I'd given him a bogus car, but I told him, I don't know. I think it's, there was this strange thing that occurred in 1981 where Harriet got a message from a medium she was seeing as a project. She went to write a paper. She saw this psychic, and the psychic said, "Give a message to Andy Colvin. His dad says he has a protector." And I sometimes wonder if, that kind of thing was, something was watching over me when I had this, car that perhaps had some evil connected to it. Christine. And I could go into all that. I'm not going to go into all the connections with the Exorcist.
Okay.
I just wanted to throw that out.
But can we at least say that Linda Blair's boyfriend at least extricated himself from the vehicle unscathed?
Well, he later became a big Hollywood editor. He's worked on some really major movies out there. His dad was an engineer, by the way, like so many of these other guys.
Yeah.
And it was always kind of sketchy as to what his dad really did. Okay, and now something that's happened recently. Oh, another thing. Let's do the Buddhist thing. I wanted to get into no, let me do the Swedish. Biz and I talked about a sort of program of what we do here.
Oh yeah, sure. No, that's right. We're going to do the Swedish.
Let's do the Swedish. I've been listening to some old Keel talk, transcribed, getting them ready to be transcribed and stuff. And there's lots of little things he said in there that are interesting. He was very interested in Sweden and what was going on there. And I found a couple of letters somewhere where he really, you could tell the tone of it that he really knew, well, for instance, they had these Foo Fighters, and back then, the old Foo Fighter idea that were the things that were flying around military airplanes, UFOs. He was really interested in those, and it was a fascinating thing, and it kind of shows that maybe the militaries had certain capabilities that we aren't aware of, and they were using them against each other.
Andrew, before you go on, you want to give us a little encapsulated comment about what the Foo Fighters are, what they were reported to be?
Well, they're these small UFOs that would fly around jet fighters and things, and track them and make maneuvers around them.
Would they be protective necessarily of U.S. aircraft?
I don't know. I don't know enough about them.
Okay. All right. That's fine. Thank you.
Keel had a real strong presence in Sweden, and then one of their guys came over to Sweden and fell in love with with the biggest, probably, Mothman witness, Linda Scarberry. And so I was in contact with this museum that has a lot of his papers and things. It was a random thing. I wanted to buy a book on eBay. I got in touch with this museum that was selling the book. I told them about my Mothman interest. They said, well, we'd like to have your video. Send us, we'll trade you a file on Woody Derenberger. And it's got correspondence from Woody. And I said, great. And somehow the museum got Derenberger's daughter involved, or somehow she got involved. And then it changed, and then I ended up getting a file that was sanitized. Half of the stuff that they promised wasn't in there. None of the Neff, Neff was the investigator. None of the Woody correspondence was in there. And so now we're kind of having this squabble about what that's all about. And little synchronicities can happen while these things are going on, and that seems to be how some of the research advances. And at the same time, I was listening to a JFK tape, and there's a connection with the Swedes. The guy who was closest to Oswald, and who was also friends with Jackie Onassis' family. Okay, this George the Morenschild fellow who is famous in the JFK world. Yeah. He was from Sweden, and I'd never known that. I just found that out. Keel also, when he would go around investigating and asking people what the MIBs look like, the Men in Black, he would show them racial profile photos, and he said that overwhelmingly people identified the MIBs as being from northern Sweden, Laplanders. Okay, so you've got a Swede coming in, hooking up with the main Mothman witness, and Swedes perhaps being these MIBs, a proven connection that they were spying on had some involvement in JFK. Of course, JFK kind of connects up to the Mothman in other ways too. It was all very interesting. Another little thing that Keel talked about, I think I mentioned Union Carbide having the Martian landscape last time, and that would have been in Mercury, Nevada, which is where the Area 51 is, right? Well, Keel mentions that Mercury, Nevada was taken out of the maps, Rand McNally maps after, I forget the date, but maybe, I think it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. He was also talking about the Roswell incident, and he thinks it was a fugu balloon, which is these balloons that would float over from Japan and blow up. They were trying to just randomly kill people.
Well, they use it, Andrew, they used it in World War II, right?
Yeah. And some of them came over, some of them hung around, and didn't come down until 47. Or maybe they were still secretly letting them off, who knows. But these had, he started talking about a Union Carbide product in relation to these balloons. He was saying that these balloons had bakelite in them. It's an early form of plastic. And I just, like I say, I got this book on carbide, and that was one of their first products. That was their first big product, was this fake or early plastic. It was very brittle. Oh, and this is totally random, but I just wanted to mention it. One of the people I interviewed in my documentary, I would say she's not a chupacabra contactee, but she has some strange link to chupacabras. But she also had a psychic experience in 911. She knew it was going to happen before it happened. They had an abduction experience in the middle of the filming. I wasn't there for it, but she talked about it. But she worked at Cantor Fitzgerald in the 911 towers before she moved to Seattle. It's an interesting thing. I was just blown away by that. And by the way, Keel mentions in his tape that there were some weird rumors in New York in '92 about Saddam Hussein blowing off a bomb. Okay, so this is right during the Gulf War, and it's almost setting the stage for, what happened 10 years later with our invasion of Iraq. Well, this George de Morenschild guy, by the way, he definitely had French intelligence links. Okay. Even though he was from a Swedish noble, he had French intelligence links, and he was also arrested as a German spy in America once, but got out of it. I was looking through my dad's Norfolk yearbook, and it turns out the French had an operation going on at Norfolk at the time of the Philadelphia experiment. And maybe this is a good way to segue into my dad.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They had a set of separate quarters there for the French Navy guys, and the description of it just has that ring to me of some kind of spy operation. By the way, Woody Derenberger, when he was in the Air Force, worked in the Air Signal Corps, which is, I'm not saying he was a spy, but that's an area that, the guys certainly have to be, have some sort of clearances to deal with, signals, communication. And did I mention he worked at Union Carbide as well?
I think you did, but I'll tell you what, it doesn't surprise us because everybody seems to be working at Union Carbide.
Well, he just like Tad Jones, quit and became an appliance salesman. They have two guys there doing that, making that unusual switch, and then the guy, the Carbide engineer who helped Keel investigate Tad Jones was an engineer at Carbide, and he probably knew my friend Tommy's dad, who was also an engineer at the Tech Center at Carbide. They have all these guys sort of in that Tech Center. Back to the Philadelphia experiment. My father was there in '43 when it happened, and I have a photo of him from that month. In D.C., he was on some kind of special assignment in D.C. I talked to my aunt a couple of weeks ago. She said he had definitely gone to Philadelphia at one point or another and been based there. And I have testimony from two fellows who had seen these men burning and disappearing in Charleston, right, at one of the chemical plants. I think I mentioned it in the first episode.
Yeah, you did.
You got some evidence that these guys were brought from Norfolk after the experiment to Charleston, worked in the plants, and some of them were blowing up and disappearing. They were catching on fire and disappearing. But the thing about my dad was, I didn't think there was much to it, other than the interesting fact that they probably brought these guys over en masse to watch them. But there's some strange connection to Montauk, and it all started with just a nightmare I had about my dad being in this chair and being really afraid and mentioning something about cancer. And this kind of ties in with the Frightwig Man too, because I feel that the Frightwig Man was I may not say his name. I kind of want people to buy the book, but Frightwig Man is probably injecting people with cancerous substances. And I feel like that dream is kind of a signal to me to sort of investigate that angle. But the chair is of interest, the chair that my dad was in, because I just recently found this out there, that Montauk, there was this thing called the chair, that they would set people in, and they would, like, time travel. And I don't put a whole lot of stock in the guys that are selling books on Montauk, because the stories are just too wild. I found it interesting that this chair thing is an integral part of their story. And even then I thought, well, that's just a little coincidence, no biggie. But then I got a contact with an old friend from the early 80s who remembered an artwork, a piece of art I had done that had to do with my dad in a chair. And she said she had never forgotten that image because it was so frightening. And I couldn't remember doing the image at all. And I still don't really remember. I think I kind of maybe remember one. But did I talk about this woman at all? She had a Navy husband who had a very suspicious military history and some pedophilia and strange.
No.
He had lots of weapons, and she only was with him a year or two.
No, I don't recall that, Andrew. But go ahead. She
remembered. It was very strange, that she remembered this image, and I'm not even sure I made it, but I guess I did. But again, that chair was the central thing in that image. Now, regarding the cancer thing, with my dad, he got cancer about 3 years after the Mothman event, and was sent to Cleveland for care, which is kind of unusual. He recovered, they got it all out. But then he had an incident where he felt like he'd been jabbed in the middle of the night by somebody or something. And he got cancer in that spot.
Where was he that he would have been possibly jabbed? Was he home? Was he on the road? Or?
Well, it was at home. I personally think it's possible that they could have drugged us or put a gas into the house or something and maybe come in or just snuck in. I think it's possible because it was so unusual the way it happened. And he did get cancer right there in that spot. But that same year, there was a big push by Nixon to turn the Army Biochemical Warfare Division, which we talked about before here, with some of the guys from Charleston being the head of that division. You have a guy from Charleston who was the head of it. You got Nixon, this is later though, Nixon coming in and saying, well, let's beef that area up and let's call it the Cancer Research Division. So suddenly you've got Nixon pumping a bunch of money in and saying, let's bring cancer into this biowarfare. And that was at Edgewood Arsenal and Aberdeen, I believe, in Maryland, which is where Harriet's family moved around the same time. But Frightwig, is a guy who definitely there's definite evidence out there that he had the knowledge of injecting people with cancer and had done so on prisoners. And it also links to some of the assassination teams that I've been talking about too. So he was definitely a scuzzy character, if you will, who would have had no qualms about doing something like that. And he may have been connected to an operation called Chaos. Did I mention Chaos before?
You might have mentioned it, but we didn't do anything in depth about it.
Chaos started in '67, around the time that these strikes were occurring at Carbide. Carbide had a strike in '66 in August, which lasted a few months. And so, the pressure was mounting as the Mothman sightings started. The companies were probably moving to quell the strike or to make things happen so that the strike would give in. And I think that's maybe is why Mothman started appearing at that time.
Well, the Operation Chaos was a government op?
Yes, and it started in Greece, actually. The model for it started in Greece. And there's European connections here all over the place. It started in Greece. The CIA and the Greek CIA were quelling the upper unrest in Greece. And then they brought that model back to the States and started using it against workers and students here. And it's my feeling, the timing of the events is just very suspicious. I actually think that they may have been, one of the things I got from a witness was that the Greek mob came into town at the time of the Mothman. So there's a connection. That's a signal to me that it probably was an Operation Chaos linked operation of some kind.
All right. Well, first of all, can you explain a little bit of what the tenets would have been of an operation such as that of Chaos? I mean, what was the agenda?
The agenda was to destabilize the peace movement primarily, and then make sure that peace movement didn't spread to the corporate world. In the Union Carbide book I have, there's a mention of this, and a claim. It's very odd the way they state it in the book that they claim that it didn't enter the plant, that the unrest over the war did not enter the gates of the plant. Okay, to me that says, well, it did enter the gates, and I know it did enter the gates of the plant because my dad told me it did.
Okay.
And he told me that there were guys talking about blowing up the plant. And there were Mothman witnesses who had visions of the plant blowing up.
Why would they want to blow up the plant? Was Union Carbide necessarily a purveyor of gas or any kind of weaponry?
Oh yeah. They were at that time they were controlling the nuclear nuclear power industry. They had leases from the Atomic Energy Commission to to mine uranium, and I believe I talked about the uranium towns before. They were making triggers for missiles, a secret, like the proximity missile at the time was the hot item. Yeah, I mean, they're a defense contractor. They do make, a lot of raw materials like plastics and those sorts of things, and chemicals that are used to make other things. But they also had involvements in military contracts.
Is Union Carbide still a good manufacturer of weaponry, chemical or otherwise?
I'm sure. Well, now they've kind of they changed the structure of the company in the 80s, and they dumped a lot of units, and then they merged with Dow.
Oh, great!
So Dow is now running the tech center, which has switched its sort of mission more to data processing, which tells you it might have something to do with data mining. And, it's in the same state where they download the signal, so probably, I mean, it's possible that they're dealing with that kind of thing. I don't know. Can't say for sure. But, again, they switch around units between themselves so much, it's hard to say who's doing what at any given moment. And I personally don't have the time to really investigate that part of it.
Yeah, well, that'll keep you running for a long time trying to track down the core of all this.
Well, it's almost time to switch into Maddox. Either go into Maddox, the big Maddox mystery in Mothman lore, or go in or do a quick foray into the Buddhist, the Garuda attacks, and the attacks on the Garuda line of reasoning, which is kind of a shorter thing.
No, let's do that. The attacks on the Garuda.
Well, yeah, it kind of ties into the thing about the Swedish museum. The guy, thinks that I think that there's a conspiracy there or something, and who knows if there. I mean, the fact that he's bringing that up is kind of interesting. But you sort of see in the East, you see attacks on bringing out the truth about the Garuda in both East and West. I guess that's my point. In the East, you see it very sharply in the Buddhist world, where there's a big schism between the Dalai Lama and Geshe Kelsang, who is Geshe Kelsang is from a line of the Buddha, of the Buddhist thought that goes back to the Buddha, and it relates to the Garuda directly. They believe the Garuda is a real deity. They want to continue to believe that and propagate the idea and spread understanding. Dalai Lama doesn't. He believes it's a, quote, superstition. And, the Dalai Lama, it's hard to fight the Dalai Lama these days because he's, worked hard at bringing his message to the West. But at the same time, I noticed that on the 4th anniversary of 9/11, it was the Dalai Lama who was on TV all day. He was the guy who was helping us, think about and process our emotions about it. So he's taking on more of even a bigger role now, I think. If you look back at how he got here, it's kind of interesting because the CIA helped bring him out of China. And I even was in a Buddhist group I was actually initiated as a priest into a Buddhist group. I was provisionally a priest, but then I dropped out during that, time period there where you have to decide, are you really going to do it? Because, the group had this same kind of connection. The leader had been a guy who was in the Signal Corps in England, and he had decided out of the blue to go to Tibet and become a Buddhist. And he places himself right there on the border where all of the Dalai Lama's entourage are coming over the mountains. And he becomes their contact. And he sets up eventually a huge Buddhist movement that revitalizes Buddhism in India, in fact. I mean, this is an Englishman who was in the British military, Air Force, ends up, revitalizing Buddhism in India. And then the Dalai Lama moves to India and sets up new facilities there. And from then on, it's kind of been this cozy, relationship. And that's sort of the eastern part of it. Now in the West, just in my own personal experience trying to spread information about the Garuda teaching, that I just get a lot of resistance. There's a lot of resistance to it. And part of it's from people tend to think Buddhism is a religion, like a competing religion with Christianity, but it's really not, because it's more of just a practice, spiritual practice, as opposed to a worship kind of thing. So on the various, there's a couple of major Mothman discussion lists that people go to, and they're both it's pretty hard to get through. One of them is really warming up to the Garuda teachings, and the other isn't. And I just wanted to. It's kind of rough at times.
Okay.
You want, and the one that is the most resistant is the local one. It's more a link to West Virginia, specifically. So.
Mm-hmm.
But we are making. I think we are making some progress, at least in the other group, which is called the New Mothman Group. If anyone is interested in going to it, there's a lot of discussion about conspiracies on there as well. So they're willing to look at the conspiracy angles, willing to look at the Garuda teaching, and actually make some progress in terms of finding out, is Mothman really a benevolent or a neutral, at least, not negative, but a neutral or even benevolent cosmic force that's helping us figure out what's going on.
Can you give us the URLs of those places where people can go?
Well, would you just go to Yahoo and click on group,
Okay.
and then search for New Mothman Group. It's one word.
New Mothman Group.
It's all run together. New
Okay.
Mothman Group.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been receptive. We had a big row about this. We did, I did have a big row with the moderator about the Christian, she doesn't like, she's Catholic and doesn't like the idea that the Garuda might be, there might be some relationship between the messianic aspects of the Garuda and the messianic aspects of Christ. But we worked through it, and there's actually a very vigorous discussion going on now about some other good topics, including 911.
Well, the thing is, I don't know why Christians would get all, hackled up about somebody positing something about what they believe. Listen, understand, Andrew, if we're grounded in what we believe, and somebody else wants to come out and, portray something, that's fine. This whole, I don't like the whole idea of censorship. The thing is, I know what I believe in, and the listeners know what they believe in. And if somebody wants to come up and do something, fine. So when you tell me, that this individual was like all upset about this being introduced, it's like, well then, what? To me, it smacks of insecurity on the behalf of the people who supposedly are grounded in what we believe is Jesus Christ. So, this stuff goes on, and you're not stepping on my toes whatsoever. It's like, okay, give us your deal. It's all right. If I can't take it, that's okay. You know what I'm saying?
One thing I just forgot, and before we move on to Maddox, it's kind of an interesting little detail. This lady that I knew that remembered this drawing of the chair, the quote Montauk chair. I went to visit her once. Her mom was a beauty queen, just like my friend Tommy's mom was a beauty queen, and similar to what was her name, John Benet Ramsey's mother.
Oh yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
Beauty queen from West Virginia.
Yep.
My friend Tommy, the Mothman contactee, his mom was a Miss West Virginia. But I was going to visit this woman, and she, by the way, lives near a NASA. Happens to live near a NASA listening station out in Massachusetts. But
it doesn't get any better, does it?
On the way, it was in 1982. We just happened to stop in New York, and there's my dog.
That's okay. Is he eating?
We're on the way to New York to see her up there, and we stopped in New York, and we got involved in the anti-nuke parade, which was happening in '82. It was a huge, 750,000 people, and we got involved with carrying the some of the stuff in the parade, and it was this huge white bird. I have a photo of it. It's in the book, by the way, my book, Eye of the Garuda. We just laid it out. It's got over 300 images, and lots of little reference photos that relate to the stories of the things I'm talking about here. But this big white bird, and the image of it looks very Mothman-like, even though it's white. Some of the Mothman sightings were of a light gray color, so you can almost imagine it. But those kinds of little things, it made me feel that there was something to what she was saying about this chair idea. But let's move into Maddox. I want to at least touch on him. Do we have much time left?
Oh, sure, we get plenty of time. That's not a problem.
There's this name Maddox that comes up in the Mothman lore. There was somebody on the bridge named Maddox who was killed. At least a threatening message was left for Keel. It was something like, "Don't investigate this anymore, or you'll end up like the Maddox, like Colonel Maddox and his daughter." And then somewhere in another, but maybe it was in the Eighth Tower, that Keel mentioned the name of Alvis Maddox as being the name on the note.
All right, now that's a real individual. That wasn't a nom de plume or a pseudonym?
It turned out that there was a real Alvis Maddox, and he was involved in the JFK thing. He was a Dallas policeman, sheriff, who is noted for being with a key witness when that witness died. The witness was Buddy Walters, a policeman, Dallas policeman, who had picked up the extra bullet. Okay, it's a crucial turning point in the whole JFK investigation. There's this extra bullet. Buddy Walters was the guy who found it, and he never would change his story. He stuck to it. He's like, "No, this was an extra bullet that was fired." And so this Alvis Maddox turns out being on assignment with Walters, and then Walters dies investigating, like a drug dealer or something. And then Maddox gets a shot in the hand or something, or in the foot. The old shoot in the foot kind of thing. I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but other people have speculated about, what, really happened there. So that's one thing about Maddox.
All right. What was Maddox's end? I mean, did he just die of natural causes later on, or?
I don't know. I think he might still be alive.
Okay, so in other words, nothing happened necessarily nefariously because of his involvement with the JFK situation.
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, but we know that Walters died.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, the Maddox name, is that curious for other reasons too?
Well, I for a while I found, I was asking about it on the list once, and I believe it was Lauren Coleman, the Bigfoot investigator, who threw out a name of a Colonel Maddox who had been in Vietnam and had worked for Bell Helicopter after Vietnam. And I think he was in Laos or Cambodia, which kind of means he probably had something to do with the Phoenix program. And then working at Bell, there was a cell of people at Bell who are linked to the JFK assassination. There's Payne, Michael Payne, who was Oswald's landlord. Ruth Payne, who I've mentioned before in this program. Her father was Arthur Young, the inventor of helicopters. And Arthur had been involved in this invocation of the Nine, this alien craft, and knew all of these other guys that had been involved with making the black box technology for mind control, making implants, and that sort of thing.
Well, when you talk about Bell, are we talking about Bell Telephone?
Bell Helicopter.
All right, it's the Bell Helicopter industry. Okay.
Also, by the way, there's a serious connection between Ruth Payne and John Kerry. I think they're cousins. I think they're first cousins. And you might want to. I might have to eat my words on that, but I'm pretty sure they are. And the investigator who's really on that is Bruce Adams. He's kind of a crazy character out in California who I think he was a postal guy who has spent all of his time and money, just investigating primarily George de Mohrenschild's and the Payne family, and he's bipartisan. He goes after Democrats and Republicans both.
Well,
but Maddox, there's that Maddox, which kind of, at one time I thought maybe that the Colonel was the father of Alvis, because they were both from Dallas, sort of the Bedford area.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I once was very close to a woman who lived in Bedford, who, that's a whole other story, but it interested me that I had actually had a connection to that little suburb where these guys, at least the Colonel lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of just wondered, it's very close to Dallas, just, right outside, so, but, I don't think there's a connection. Let's see.
Well, you wouldn't have brought it up if you didn't think there might be something.
Well, one time I thought there was,
okay.
and who knows if there is, there may be, but another Manson, another Maddox name is linked to the 9 as well. Holly Maddox was the name of the woman who was supposedly murdered by Ira Einhorn, the Philadelphia labor, political leftist scientist.
All right, who fled to Europe after the supposed or the alleged murder, right?
Right, and Einhorn in an interview said that he had worked on this black box technology, and he was really close to Puharich, so, Puharich was the implant guy. And they had access to all these silicon chips. They had a tie-in with a company that made the chips. It was really small ones. They could do stuff with them. So there's a Maddox dying in relation to the 9. Perhaps was set up. It sounds like he was set up. Einhorn was set up. To me.
All right. Okay. So he might not. Do we know what happened to that case? Was it ever adjudicated?
Well, that's the funny thing, you never heard anything about it once they caught him.
Yeah.
And that's sort of a giveaway, isn't it?
Well, yeah, we do wonder when things disappear in the memory hole. And that's one of those cases that did such.
Another Maddox is Charles Manson's mother. Her name was Maddox.
Now, hold on. Is Manson's last name really Manson?
No. His mother's name is Maddox, and since they won't identify his father, he might as well be a Maddox. But supposedly his father's name was Scott, and he was an Army colonel. Now, it makes you wonder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does.
Army colonel, but
supposedly
he was Colonel Scott, and they can identify the brother. This is the weird thing. They can identify the brother of the colonel, Darwin Scott, who got murdered in '68, perhaps by the Manson family. He was brutally slashed. It could have been Charles Watson, another Dallas police family guy, who was Manson's killer, right-hand man.
Well, hold on. Wasn't Watson one of the members of the Manson gang?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He was in the Manson family.
Okay.
He was the slasher guy. He was the real slasher, right? Well, Manson's uncle ends up slashed just like the Tate victims, right? There's lots of victims of ancillary victims in the Manson case that have never been talked about in the media. Okay? And this guy died right there on the border of Ohio and Kentucky, right? 30 miles from Port Pleasant or less.
Right.
And that's where Lavinda kind of gets his idea that he thought Manson was from Ashland, but Manson is more from Charleston, I think.
All right, who was the individual who was killed in proximity to Point Pleasant?
Darwin Scott.
All right, Scott was slashed.
Yeah, and supposedly he's Manson's uncle, but yet we never hear the name of the father. If they know the uncle's name, why don't we know the first name of the father? I think it's very suspicious.
Well, that gives rise to the whole thing. And again, you know that the Manson family was also used, if I'm correct, in certain hits on Gerald Ford.
Well, certainly, again, we know that Manson knew Sarah Jane Moore from way back.
All right.
And we know, of course, Manson and Squeaky were lovers.
Prom, yeah.
So, maybe Manson, who knows? Yeah, definitely. Manson was being used for all kinds of things, and he was a police informer. and he got credit cards all along, financing things, and no one quite knows, what that was all about.
Well,
He got help. He got lots of help doing what he did, and then of course Watson was probably behind a lot of that, a lot of setting Manson up to take the fall.
Was Watson's nickname Tex? Is that?
Yeah.
I remember that correctly. Okay. I tell you what, that murder with Sharon Tate and all those headlines occurred right after my birthday in '69, and I remember the Daily News, and I'm like, boy, this is so bizarre. Because you also know that obviously Tate's husband, Roman Polanski, was into filming the macabre, and it was almost like life imitating art, imitating life.
Yeah, and there's the connections to the Robert F. Kennedy assassination with Polanski, too. And I know the first cousin of Sharon Tate. He was in the band I was in. He's one of the oil kids I was talking about earlier. He's a whole other story. He's a crazy character, but that's just another little coincidence. And another little coincidence that probably means nothing. I'm sure it means nothing, but the ship that started Vietnam was the Maddox, and then Vietnam ends up being the incubator for these assassins, who later, I think, ended up training in West Virginia.
Now, was there a camp in West Virginia? I mean.
I think there were, we have witnesses at least on the discussion list saying they saw men doing paramilitary training in the TNT area, where you had all of these bunkers, where anything could have been stored, hundreds of these bunkers. And this is another unusual coincidence. Right, I think it was the week before the Mothman sighting started, one of these bunkers in Louisiana was busted by Garrison, the Jim Garrison investigation.
Okay.
And so here you have these paramilitary guys in Louisiana connected to JFK who suddenly have nowhere to train, and their bunkers are taken away. And the bunkers were, by the way, leased to an oil company, which has offices in West Virginia. They also have offices all over the world, but it's a very kind of the provenance of the history of that company. And I don't know, I'm not even sure if I want to name it, but the history of the company goes back to Europe. It goes back to, there's connections to Benedict Arnold and the Tories and all of that in the history of that company.
What a surprise.
Yeah. So suddenly they have nowhere, and they need a place now that's isolated and where they have a lot of bunkers. And they can just go right up the Ohio River, the Mississippi River, Ohio River, right in, ship all the stuff up, unload it right there. The TNT area is right by the water, and put the stuff in the bunkers and start training. And it's kind of a toxic sludge waste site. It's an it's a Superfund site, so there aren't people in there. People stay away, so it's perfect. And I don't think the Mothman was there to scare people away, because the Mothman drew people in, right? So I think the Mothman was, again, this deity showing up to give a clue as to what was going on and bringing all these people there to see it, right? Hundreds of people coming, and it's really crimping the style of these paramilitary guys. So they used muscle in town to scare people, to tell them to shut up and stay away. So that to me makes the most sense.
When you talk about the paramilitary exercises, I think back to prior to JFK with David Ferry. And do you remember, did they take place in Louisiana or around Texas?
Did what? The exercises?
Where Ferry held his paramilitary things.
Yeah, they did. And Ferry was into the occult. So,
yes, he was.
And there were also occult groups seen at the time of the Mothman practicing in the TNT area, doing, people in rows. And, you had a lot of dog mutilation, so everyone was assuming that these mutilations were caused by this occult group.
All right, let me clarify this, just to go back, and if you don't remember this, that's fine. Was Ferry's venues in Louisiana?
Yeah,
Okay.
At Houma, Louisiana was
All right, Houma. Okay.
Was where he was training.
That's
and,
what okay. And now we have others in West Virginia. Can you name any of the towns that they might have been in around?
Well, his phone records indicate a ferry called Huntington, West Virginia. I know that much. And we have people seeing a guy who looked like he was wearing a fright wig. And of course, you know Ferry.
He wore wigs. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He wore a bright red ape hair wig that he used. He got the hair from the apes the monkeys that he used in his cancer experiments. Yeah. I mean, if you saw JFK the movie, you'll remember Joe Pesci, right?
Oh yeah, he was great. Yeah.
Well, that's him. That's David Ferry. He was a wandering bishop in the old American Catholic Church, which is a fake lineage, and that was these lineages were set up so that CIA guys could use churches as fronts for various activities and give them an excuse to be here and there and raising money or doing whatever they want to do.
Well, I got to stop you there. The Wandering Bishops, when I heard Lavenda when he was on Ghost to Ghost, and talking about the Wandering Bishops, and I'm saying to myself, okay, I got a feeling this might be another order. But be that as it may, Ferry was involved with these Wandering Bishops, or was one in fact?
Oh, absolutely. He was. He. If I forget. Somebody's written a pretty good article on that. He was from Cleveland, by the way. He always wanted to be a priest early on. He was a pedophile eventually. Became a pedophile.
Well, that makes him legitimate.
He kept getting in trouble for his pedophilia, and so he couldn't get in to the church as a bishop, or a priest. So he ended up, working for the CIA. And and who knows who came up with the idea to do these wandering. I think it started in the early 1900s. They started this operation. And there was principally out of New York City was where they operated.
What operation were we talking about? Wandering Bishops?
Yeah, the Wandering Bishops had three major branches, but they all came out of New York originally.
Mm-hmm.
One was the Ophish line, which was kind of I think it was more Eastern Orthodox, kind of a Lebanese, Middle Eastern, whatever, type group. And they started in the early 1900s, and then there was another line that stayed in New York, I think, but another one went to Kentucky. There's a guy who one of the three branches was represented by a guy in Eastern Kentucky. I think it was Eastern Kentucky, and so that kind of puts him in the area as well. And interestingly, that guy died the same month as Ferry. Ferry died in February of '67. And this other bishop who consecrated Ferry, even that's the thing, is that the interesting connection there. That this wandering bishop from Kentucky consecrated Ferry into his order, thus giving Ferry a little more, he gave Ferry the ability to wear the robe. If you remember the JFK movie, there was a robe hanging there. I think they made reference to the robe hanging there and the various Catholic things that were there. But Ferry was into these monkeys, and I'll let you cut in here.
No, that's okay.
But he was into these monkeys, and there have been witnesses that have come forward to say that Ferry was experimenting on prisoners at a Louisiana prison, injecting them with cancerous substances, and I think this came from Mary Sherman, and there's been another lady that's come forward to say that she was dating Lee Harvey Oswald, and that Lee was also involved in that. And at one time, there's both Ferry and Lee Harvey Oswald were involved in the Oxner Clinic in Louisiana, which was doing cancer research. Basically, that was coming out of this whole other sort of line of inquiry, which had to do with polio vaccines in the 50s being contaminated with SV40 virus, which causes cancer.
Yep.
So all the early polio vaccines had a cancer-causing agent in them, and this was covered up. It was a really big scandal. Oxner was behind it. He was the polio vaccine spokesman. And he even injected his own grandchildren, and they got polio, and I think one of them died. But Oxner set up this big clinic to And a lot of people think it was set up to try to find the answer, try to find out how can we reverse what we've done with these contaminated vaccines. And supposedly that's where Ferry and Oswald got their training. Because there's a photo of Oswald and Ochsner on an album that was put out by a right-wing radio station. I forget the name of it. It was in New Orleans. So there's a connection there, but definite connection there.
Well, Andrew,
Ochsner was a well-known right-wing supporter of dictators in South America, and a lot of the dictators would fly their families up to get care in New Orleans.
Andrew, let me ask you this. I mean, I had a photo, and I've lost it. I've left the place where I stored the photo. I think Eric John Phillips might still have it. But there was a photo of Civil Air Patrol. You remember that was big back in the 60s and such?
Yeah, I'm going to have that in my book. I'm going to have a little picture of that.
You had a photo with Ferry and Oswald?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've seen it.
Yeah, and a good book to read if you're interested in that topic is it's called Mary, Ferry, and the Monkey Virus. It's about Mary Sherman, a cancer researcher. She was a legitimate cancer researcher, really brilliant woman who she was the point person who was trying to figure out how to solve this problem with the polio vaccine. And she had all these monkeys, right, and that they were working on at the clinic. And I think Oswald lived just like a couple of blocks from the clinic. And you can actually go there and see where they had their setup. There's wires and stuff still left. But they were irradiating all these different mice and apes and things to try to figure out what to do. But she ended up being murdered, and it appears that she was actually blown up by one of the rays from this radioactive machine they were using, that somebody like stuck her in front of it. And then they dumped her body in her apartment and set fire to the mattress, and then it was all written off as a suicide or something, or an accidental fire. But there was no way, I mean, her arm was burned completely off, so there was no way a mattress fire could have done that. Because they didn't find her, I mean, she was, it only smoldered. I think the mattress only just sort of smoldered a little bit.
Well, I mean, there's the whole legacy about the JFK witnesses and such, and how many of them met ill fates.
Well, Ferry ended up with her monkeys. Okay, that's the story. That's why Ferry had all these monkeys. And and the guy that wrote the book, his name escapes me. He happened to stumble upon Ferry's old apartment, and sure enough, the smell was still there. Some weird coincidence. I think he was put onto the story by the fact that the author, who went to school with the coroner's son, and the coroner's son stood up in class one day and said, "My dad says that." What was he talking about? I think he basically said some things in class that let everybody know that the coroner was making, that there was a fix. The fix was in. On some of the JFK deaths and things. So,
all right, I'll tell you what, we're going to hold it right there. We're going to come back for another program. Is that okay, Andrew?
Yeah. All
right, and I'll tell you what, we're going to outro with one of the songs that I believe you're involved with, are you not? Manson Street?
Yeah, this is Charlie Manson Street. It's a song that I wrote back in the 80s with the Oil Boys from Texas. It was originally a punk song, and we redid a different version of it here that's on the sort of the soundtrack to the documentary.
Clouds of perverted is that? Running the pipeline, running for fearsome, kind of invisible track could be waiting, playing with fire, making no sense, hunting with hound dogs, sharing sin. This is Charlie Manson's big chemical plants, reduce the heat, Sarah Jane Moore's hillbilly store, drinking from stills, raking the floor. One room shaka-laka-laka-laka-laka, wieners in the can for a snack, 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 smoking from a pipe in the back, 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 staring at a light so black, 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 heinous crime on my heinous head, bones in the snow, snakes in the bed, heinous sky that's a heinous red, stuff in the air that stops in your head. Heinous smoke from a heinous stack, dirt on the